So I have some talking points here, but I'm not really good. I usually go way off my talking points. So I'll talk a little bit from my heart, and then I'll say a few of my talking points. So my name's Teresa Carlson. I run our worldwide public sector business. And in fact, I've been blessed that I got to start this business for Amazon Web Services almost 7 years ago. And if any of you came this morning, you heard me say, and if you're not, you'll hear me say in my keynote tomorrow, I always come out and say, wow, I can't believe how our business, our customers, our partner ecosystem has grown. But the one thing that we hadn't done a great job at was really focusing ourselves on how we created a really diverse ecosystem within the marketplace. Like, how do we think about diversity, women, inclusion? And I started 7 years ago. I wasn't sure how to actually do it because I was literally so busy rolling up my sleeves and trying to build a business on a global basis. I couldn't really pinpoint exactly how we should think about this problem that we have, which is we don't have enough women, we don't have enough diversity, and we don't have enough young girls even within technology thinking about it. And while myself, my own experience is I'm not a coder or engineer by background, when I started understanding technology about 22 years ago now, because I was in healthcare, it was like, oh my gosh, where have you been all my life? And I have loved this career. It has changed my life. I'm pretty technical now too. I can hold my own in most conversations today. And I understand most things, which is good, but I still have to work at it because at AWS we make sure that we're deploying and innovating in big ways, so you got to stay fresh, and it keeps you smart, which is good, and curious about things. But I want those experiences for all diverse groups, and I guess I do have an affinity and a special love in my heart for young girls to really also think about technology. Because my father was a math teacher, and while I loved math, I knew nothing about technology, not till I was much older. And now there are so many amazing careers in technology and STEM fields, and I want all of our young students to really understand the opportunity. And even if they decide they don't want actual careers, we need to make sure they have a deep understanding, because I can't imagine in this world pretty much any job going forward that does not have technology involved in some way, shape, or form. So they need to understand it. So with that, so what are we doing about this? Well, in the early days, we sort of went around the world, and when I would go around the world, I would grab the most prominent group of women I could find in every country or city, and we would have a conversation about what can we do to power technology in our schools. At that time, we really had to focus on just young girls. What can we do to get them excited? And we would sort of try to build an ecosystem. And that really was okay, but not enough. We were doing things in embassies and different programs. And we were, going out like we're doing with the last panel and talking about economic growth and jobs. But we weren't really targeting and focusing. So today we've changed that. I'll fast forward. Today we have a big focus on it. We're really looking internally at our metrics and what we're doing and how we're doing things. We're trying to change processes and models. And while I focus some of my time internally, I like to focus a lot of my time externally because it's where I spend my time with customers and partners. But we hired Margie, and Margie Elliot now runs our diversity and inclusion in terms of really helping us now have a deep focus. And we're continuing to do that. We're doing it all up at Amazon, all up at AWS. And while these panels that we have, these amazing individuals that on this panel today, while it's not the answer, it's a way to create a dialogue and begin to come up with solutions. Because I don't want to just talk about problems. We all know the problems. But what are we going to do? Like what's the opportunity to change and really do things? So I like to make sure in everything we're doing, we just don't call out problems, but we really focus on solutions and work together. So I'll leave it at that. I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Michael Jackson, who's in our healthcare practice, who's going to help facilitate today and let you hear from our amazing panel But I hope you'll join in with all of us here at AWS to really help have a more inclusive workplace, and not just that, but let's hire and let's start early, because we have a sort of short-term and a long-term problem. So we can't just focus on one or the other. We sort of got to focus on the whole spectrum. So, and thank you, by the way, for being with us here this week at the AWS conference. So I hope to see you tomorrow at the keynote too. Thank you, guys.
All right. Energy. I know this is one of the last sessions of the day, but it is, in my opinion, one of the most important sessions of the day as well. So thank you all for joining us. As Teresa said, this is building an inclusive technology workforce. It's kind of the follow-up to the previous panel, which was driving economic development and job creation. So in the last panel, they talked a lot about how technical innovations can drive economic development. Well, in this panel, we're going to sort of stay on that theme, but we want to speak about how that success and that development is inclusive of all populations, of all individuals. And so what I would like to do first is just put a question out there. You know, does anyone have an idea, possibly, what is the difference between diversity and inclusion? For me, specifically, I think of inclusion as more of an active process. It's a conscious effort to make sure that everyone is being included and their contributions are valued. And I don't mean just based on the color of your skin or the sexual orientation or things like that, but I mean, if you look at a person comprehensively, I mean, you can look at me and tell that I'm an African-American man, but you can't tell that I'm a veteran. You can't tell that I'm a parent. I mean, all of us are very complex. All of us have multiple facets to each of us. And so that's what we want to dive in today. And it's a small enough group that I would love for this to be a dialogue and not a monologue. And so as Teresa said before she left, this is something that we're actively pursuing at Amazon. So speaking of Amazon, I'll tell you a little bit about my role here in the company. Next week will be my 1-year anniversary. So I've been at Amazon now for about a year. And we have 14 of what we call leadership principles. And these leadership principles are more than just text on a page. They're more than just marketing fluff. It really is a way of life. We all embrace it. We all acknowledge when we see each other celebrating and living those leadership principles. And sometimes we sort of pull each other up when we're not living up to it, right? It's a way of life for each and every one of us. And one of those leadership principles is to hire and develop the best. So you think about that. I mean, on its face, it sounds pretty straightforward, right? You want the best team, so you just hire and develop the best. Well, what if you don't have access to the best? Do you just hire the best among what you see? How do you ensure that the pipeline of the best is being nurtured, looking upstream? So another one of our leadership principles is customer obsession. And so just like everything, we're going to turn to our customers to lead this dialogue about inclusion and diversity. So I mentioned how I typically define inclusion, an active journey, whereas diversity I think of as more of a status of makeup of a group. But sometimes you can't really see all aspects of each individual in that group, regardless of how you look on the inside. You can't tell how diverse an individual really is. So inclusion speaks to celebrating and valuing every slice of every individual. So like I said, customer obsession is what we do. So we're going to turn to our customers, and we've got 3 very esteemed panelists here who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about themselves, and then we'll open up our dialogue. So let's start first. To my left is Teresa Boer. She's an IT specialist of policy and strategic planning at the National Institutes of Health. So Teresa?
Thank you for the introduction.
Absolutely.
So yes, I work specifically on IT policy and strategic planning, but moreover than that, I also am very involved in the disability community throughout NIH. I lost my vision right before my 25th birthday, so I have not always been blind, and that has given me a completely different perspective, going from being sighted, being a normal 24-year-old, to then having this amazing change in my life, and figuring things out from there. And what I didn't know before, and I'm only gonna throw a couple statistics out there to give you some perspective, is the US Census Bureau predicts that, I'm sorry, that's the other statistic about the Social Security Administration, so we'll start there. So the Social Security Administration predicts that 1 in 4 Americans who are 20 years old today will have a disability by the time they retire. So that's at age 65. The US Census Bureau tells us that people with disabilities are the largest minority population, and over 53%, that's over half of people in the US who are over 50 years old, have a disability. And disability is one thing that does not discriminate. We talk about diversity, it does not discriminate between gender, race, sexual orientation, age, economic status. Disability is something that transcends all of those. And you never know who might be touched, when it might be you or a family member. And that to me has given me a different perspective on inclusion, and particularly in the field that I work in technology. So that's kind of the perspective that I will bring to today's discussion.
Thank you, Teresa. And to Teresa's left, we have Tony Williams, who's the Senior Director of Government and External Affairs at Comcast.
So, well, thank you, MJ. As MJ said, I am the Senior Director of Government and External Affairs, but he left off half of my company. We are Comcast NBC Universal. And so we do everything from, obviously, broadband and cable to media, movies, television. We like to say that we connect people to the important things in their lives. And one of which, hopefully, is Amazon. So, but the real reason that I'm here, and I think the real reason that I got asked to speak, is that before I came over to the government affairs side of the house, I largely spent about 3 years of my career leading the creation of public-private partnerships around a program we have called Comcast Internet Essentials. And Internet Essentials, for those of you who have not heard of it, is the largest broadband adoption program in the world. It has connected over 3 million low-income Americans to the internet, focuses largely on low-income households with children. Although it's been expanded, it works with public housing now, works with community college students, and so we've continued to expand, continue to grow the program. And what I did while I was there was really create partnerships with school districts, with community-based organizations, with housing organizations, driven around the country to get them connected to the internet, to create training programs, so that there's really, if you would, expanding that pipeline of talent and accessibility into the STEM fields, as well as into companies like mine, like Amazon and others.
All right, thank you, Tony. And last but definitely not least, we have Archana Bamupali.
He was practicing.
Archana is the Chief Technology Officer for the government of the District of Columbia. So thank you for joining us, Archana.
Thank you for having me.
Sure.
So I work for DC, and it's one of the fun jobs to have because we solve real-world problems, and we use technology in sometimes the most efficient way possible because we're funding constrained to solve issues that impact all of us as we live in the city. And we're forced to be creative, we're forced to be innovative, and we're always challenged to do the right thing because we're working with taxpayer dollars in every single day. And so this panel is of great interest to us because we believe in diversity and inclusion, not just as a term that's said, but as a city we adopt it as a theme. Inclusive innovation is one of the major pitches that DC stands by and that the administration and the mayor has defended. And so, hopefully we can talk more about that and what we're doing in the city about that. But we believe that when you openly call out and acknowledge inclusion, that's when you pay attention and you actually include. And if you don't call out inclusion, you exclude. And so that was our whole intent with what we're doing in the city.
All right. Well, thank you, Archana. And there's one more person I'd like to acknowledge who is not on the stage, but it's Margie Elliot, our diversity marketing manager, who was vital in putting this together. So not only is this panel, sharing experiences and really engaging in a dialogue with you guys today, but it's being videotaped, and this will live on and touch many more people to understand what Amazon and our partners and customers are investing in inclusion, and it couldn't have happened without Margie. So I just want to thank you, Margie, for helping us with that. All right, so guys, I know we talked a little bit out in the hallway, and we've been in touch leading up to this panel. Before we go into the Q&A, I would like to just pause right here, pan the audience, and ask, is there anything that you guys want to discuss? I mean, I think the group is intimate enough to just talk about what's on your mind. Is there anything that you would like to learn more about NIH or Comcast NBC Universal or the government of DC as it relates to inclusion? If not, we've got some, oh, yes, sir. All right, he's going to use his New York voice.
Or I'll use the mic. So, I guess like in New York, there are countless subway stations where there's no elevator, right? So, some seemingly like simple things that we know we need to do are not being done. What are the ways that I guess technology can make government more accessible and personalized in a way that can really reach people? How can technology both personalize and simplify and be more accessible to people with disabilities?
That's a great question. So for those of you who didn't hear, he said, how can technology be leveraged to make government more accessible and more personalized for everyone? And we kind of I started by saying that everyone should be included not only in the contributions of the technology, but the benefits as well. So why don't I pose that question to, do you want to start, Teresa?
Sure. So in terms of what the government can do, I think that there are multiple levels there. You referenced a physical access challenge. And I'm going to take that to a more of a technology access challenge. So technology today is how we share information. It's how we communicate. It's how people find out what's going on in the world. It's how it affects almost all of our daily lives and our employment. And certainly there are laws that say, technology developed by the federal government has to be accessible. But putting that into practice is still a challenge. And I think that goes to the heart of this conversation of how do we include people of all sorts of various backgrounds, all sorts of different, whether it's a disability or learning perspective, to look at technology in those different ways, from those different components. If we have a very, if we have just one lens that we're looking at things through, then we only get that one perspective. And studies have shown that a diverse environment does produce more creativity. It does produce better ideas and groupthink. But in terms of that improvement, I think that we have to be able to have that discussion openly and to say, we're not there today. We have a long way to go. How do we get there? And it's including those populations, not having a conversation about that population and coming up with the solution that's right for them, but saying, what is right for you? How do we make this better for you? And really listening and taking that feedback and incorporating it in.
So I spend a lot of time, is it okay for me to just jump in?
Jump right in.
I don't,
conversation.
I don't want to be rude.
You can speak for the city, go ahead.
Yeah, so I spend a lot of my time working with mayors, working with other city officials, state officials, and talking about technology and what it can do, what it can't do, and that interchange. And one of the things that I actually have seen that government can do that to make technology more accessible, but also to make their service more accessible, more so than anything else, is actually open up the data. So you look at what Boston has done, you look at what Philadelphia has done, you look at even San Francisco, a number of cities, what they've done is they've started to pull back, if you would, the veils, open up the data, and sometimes it's really that, it's messy, but what we know and what every developer knows is that creation doesn't happen from the top down. That's not how development works, right? It works sort of a problem solving as a bunch of folks come to it in trial and error. And so when you open up the data, when you allow folks to look and try to figure out their own problems, that's where you start to get that innovation. That's where we've seen real movement in terms of 311. We've seen in terms of procurement. We've seen in terms of access to different billing systems. We've seen real innovation in that space. Again, all in different cities and different places, but that's where we've seen real accessibility get driven and openness get driven. And so while there are plenty of steps, concrete steps that a government can take, and I'll let Archana talk about those, I think that the biggest thing that they can do is open up the data, allowing other companies, allowing other creators, other developers access to it to create solutions that work for everyone.
All right. So is that easier said than done, or what's your take on that, Archana?
No, it's actually not that difficult. It's how you coordinate it. And I just wanted to add, I know you rattled off like other major cities, but DC is the leader for open data. Right. We're the ones that started it. So I think we should sometimes pat ourselves in our own home city too.
I was afraid to speak about DC with sitting
should.
next to you.
We should. But I totally recognize your point. I think there's an aspect of transparency that you need to have as an organization because it helps you improve and it helps you get better. But to a point that was raised about how can the city be personable and how can the city be accessible to what you need, if you actually take the city out of the equation for a second and you think of any organization, it really comes down to what is a technical role and what is a functional role.
Right.
And when you're deploying something and you're coming up with a product, if you put the functional people in charge, it'll be everything they want. It'll be the most expensive thing they ever implement. And if you put the technical people in charge, they'll build a beautiful system that will not give you what you want, but will actually work great. Right? And that is your fundamental problem. Your problem is that you need the right people at the table having the conversation engaged. And so in the city, I argue that DC has actually taken a different tack to how we approach some of these things. And we've been talking to other cities about thinking about how they approach future investments. So when we talk about smart cities or a smarter DC initiative, we didn't set up, unlike most cities, a separate office to work on future projects. We didn't say we're going to hire somebody to be the smart city manager for the city. We set up an all-volunteer workforce, and we went to each of the different departments that works on these different issues for people and said, who are the people that have worked here the longest, and what are your pain points, and what have you seen people struggle with? So we pull them in, right? And we set up a Smarter DC task force that's essentially different people with different operational experience across the board to talk about diversity of opinion. I just didn't bring the 22-year-old who just graduated from college who said, I can solve these problems overnight. I also respected that there was a 70-year-old that probably tried for 40 years in the government and was frustrated, and there must be a reason why. And that's what we wanted to tap into, right? So we built in a diverse spectrum. Then we sat down and said, who else are we missing? And that's the question you have to always ask, is who else is missing at the table, right? And then we said, okay, you know what, they're universities. We're not the only stakeholders. Businesses care about the city because they want the city to grow.
Right.
They're universities that care about research, then they have a longer term perspective than sometimes we in the government have. So how do we bring them in? And then finally, we said, who are we building these products for? The beauty of working for the city is also I'm a long-term district resident, so I dealt with the city for many years before I became an employee, right? And so when you're a resident, you don't think about, oh, there's a traffic problem, I need to go to the Department of Transportation, or I have a permit issue, I need to go somewhere else. You just think it's the government. It's either working or not working for you. Yeah. So how do you improve that experience? So we started engaging with the residents. So we started an ideation series, and it was naturally one of those many hackathons all cities like to have. But we said part of it is actually non-technical, right? We'll come in and we'll show you some of the technologies we're piloting. Come in and give us your feedback. Tell us what you love about it. Tell us what you hate about it. Question us on it. Or tell us something we haven't thought about. How do we define that neighborhood for you, right? Because there is no one size fits all. I'll tell you for streetlights, we've had this discussion. right? Every neighborhood has different perspectives on what that light should be, whether it should be on or off, whether it should look a certain way or not. So you talk about personalizing it per neighborhoods, that's exactly what we're doing. And it's engaging those residents. And so I think it can be done. You just have to structure it. You have to set up that model. You have to set up the right governance. And then you have to, I think, constantly reinforce to people that you need to get all the perspectives in, but at the end of the day, the one common cause is the city.
Right.
You can't lose sight of.
So if I can summarize, it sounds like the common thread that was woven through each of your answers was that the team that drives the development of the solution should be reflective of the people that will actually use or engage the solution. Is that fair to say? As well as opening the data so that as many people as possible can contribute to that development. And I will say, just quick plug, that I know that the city of DC is an AWS customer and you're on the cloud, and so that does help to accelerate opening that data, correct?
Yeah, I mean, so I think you need to have a diverse team, but you always, anytime you're building a product, I mean, I would think it's common sense that you need to know who you're building it for.
Yes.
And who your audience is. If I have a neighborhood where if my entire neighborhood is a retired community, I need to see what solutions I'm putting out there that mean the most to them and what do they care about and they need. I can't come up with something that another neighborhood that has a completely different spectrum of people living deployed out that doesn't apply, right? I mean, you want what, there was a term that was introduced like 15 years ago. It's not very popular. It was called mass customization. And the idea of mass customization is that you come up with a certain core principles that you roll out. And from a city standpoint, that makes sense. But you put in enough of a variability where you customize it for the neighborhood or for the requirements. And then you keep certain key features in length. So for us, we look at like 4 things for every like new technology, right? So we look at equity. No matter what, equal access, and making sure equal opportunity in anything we deploy across the board. So that addresses accessibility too, right? How I get from one place to the other place is not the same for any of us. And so when you're talking about equal access, how do you enable that? We look at resilience. So from a city standpoint, if you're living in the city, how quickly can we restore services? What is our ability to bounce back, right? We look at collaboration and transparency, right? What do we need to do? Each time we are investing in something new, what do we need to do from that perspective to sort of push the boundaries? And then at the end of it, it all comes also down to sustainability, right? And what are, are we investing in a way that we continue to be sustainable and be pushing for sustainable practices? So we use sort of those principles to sort of drive it, right? So the technology may change, the people may change, but if you stick with your core principles, then your investments are always aligned.
All right, that's a great point. You mentioned sustainability, and I think that's a great segue to something else that I would like to pose to the panel. So we talked a little bit about a diverse or an inclusive workforce, and I'd like to come back to how to do that. I'd like the folks in the audience to understand steps that each of your organizations or your teams are taking to do that. But once you have an inclusive workforce, it's been my observation that, coming back to our leadership principle of hiring and developing the best, most teams, when they look for individuals to bring into their team, they rely on individuals primarily to tap their networks. You know, who do you know? Who can you vouch for? And if your team is not diverse or inclusive, then their networks likely will not be as well, right? So in order to sustain an inclusive environment and ensure that the networks of the people on those teams are just as diverse as the team itself, in order to organically sustain that inclusion, that's one way of looking at it. But I would like to ask each of you, how do you develop and retain and engage an inclusive workforce? Why don't we start with you, Teresa?
Again?
Go for it.
Well, we're gonna work our way around. Well,
Did you want to mix it up? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
let's mix it
All right,
up.
let's
Because
mix it
I
up
need
and
to,
go with-
you
okay,
know,
let's-
I have something, but I want
Go
to
for it,
think.
Tony. It's
All right, let's go with
It's
Tony.
your moment to shine.
Oh, there you go. So, you know, at Comcast NBC Universal, about 6 years ago, we went through a real watershed moment. So we actually acquired NBC Universal. And so when you acquire a company that's about sort of the size of the company that's acquiring it, right, then it provides an opportunity to really think about, well, what are you doing that's working, what's not working, what best practices do they have, what best practices do you have that you can sort of apply to it. And one of the things that NBC Universal had, well, they actually had a couple, but one of them was sort of a joint diversity council, where they actually had different leaders from the different, if you would, different communities who came in, met with our business leaders, really were treated like they were part of the team, and were able to give feedback in a really concrete fashion where it wasn't something that we were worried that they were going to take out and sort of run away and sort of beat us over the head with, but instead to be collaborators and be partners with us on how do you build a better, if you would, build a better company.
Sure.
And so as we went through that process, one of the many things that we ended up talking about was, well, what was the impact that would have on our workforce? And how do we change how we recruit, how we hire, how do we look at that? So everything from implementing the Rooney Rule to really looking and focusing on the development of our own workforce, both non-technical into the technical space.
Can I ask you to pause for a second and explain what is the Rooney Rule for those who don't?
Oh, absolutely. So for those of you who aren't football fans, so this rule is that basically from whenever you go to hire an employee, for one of the candidates has to be, they have to be a minority, right? So at least to make sure that you have a diverse slate of candidates. That's really, if you would, it removes sort of the laziness factor, right? That just happens in any recruiting effort. You have an open position, your job is just get it filled. Hey, whoever applied and walked through the door, all right, let me go with those. This says no, just as a practice, we need to make sure that we are getting folks who represent our community, represent the various communities that are out there. And so that forces you to develop new relationships. So that means that instead of just going to, the Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanfords, the things that are sort of easy to do, and that people have those recruiting relationships, it means, let's make sure that we have a relationship with Temple. Let's make sure we have a relationship with Howard. Let's make sure we have a relationship with Rutgers, schools where you get, or University of Baltimore, you get really great minority tech talent coming out of there that, otherwise, you might have sort of taken the easy, you might not have seen because they just wouldn't have been in front of them. So, but the long and short of it is we've had these conversations, we start to implement policies to enforce them, and we also start to look at the data. And so we would sit down, because you had to keep coming back to the same group and talking about the data, talking about the progress that you made, why you've made that progress, why you haven't, and being able to have those honest conversations. And a lot of times it's hard to have those honest conversations, and that has allowed us to have real progress there. So today, about 60% of our workforce is diverse. It's, our director, or, when you look at new directors in our company, it's about a 58% of all new hires are diverse hires. And in fact, among women directors, we've had almost 70% increase in that number over the past, I think it is 5 years. So we've had real improvement, and it all comes from knowing the numbers, being able to have real conversations about it, and then being willing to make those changes.
So before I ask for your response, Archana, I'd like to push back on that a little bit.
Okay.
It's a great response, but what happens when the pool of quote unquote diverse candidates is not as rich as you would like? And we can talk about the definition of a diverse candidate, but let's say anyone, because I think we all have an element of diversity among us, but if the pool of candidates is not as rich, as an organization or as a team, how do you adjust? I mean, I would think you wouldn't lower the bar, or you wouldn't ideally allow a position to go unfilled, eternally. So, do you have any thoughts around?
Yeah. So look, I mean, I fundamentally don't believe that hiring diverse candidates or prioritizing diversity and inclusion is about lowering the bar. It's absolutely not about lowering the bar. It's actually, if I would say anything, that's about raising the bar. And the real challenge is about where do you find that talent. Our company is headquartered in Philadelphia for Comcast, New York for NBC, and LA for Universal, and Telemundo is in Miami, right? So, we have very diverse markets, right? Hispanics in LA and Miami, New York and Philadelphia is really everybody, but huge African American populations. They're all urban environments, so you have everybody from all sorts of different stripes. And so our company should represent those places where we are. And the way that we do that is, and the way that when our HR team was challenged with this, it was about expanding the relationships that they had. So, there's a lot of it is also separating sort of the signal from the noise when it comes to talking about diversity. And to me, there's a lot of noise around not being enough tech talent that's diverse out there. But when you actually look at the numbers, right? Now, there's not great diversity in terms of tech talent. You're not getting 50% of classes that are minorities or whatever, but you're getting 15, 20% of classes in a lot of places. And you look at most tech companies, and we're talking 1%, 2% diverse employment. So there's room for improvement. And then particularly, then it's a question about where you're recruiting from. Are you looking places at Georgia Tech, which graduates more African American engineers than any other school in the country, right? Because if you're looking there, you can find some African American engineers. Now, if you're looking at Stanford, maybe you only can find 2 or 3. And so, are you looking at Drexel if you're in Philadelphia? Or if you're in DC, are you looking at Howard, right, in the program that I know that they recently launched with Google and others? So it's a little bit about where are you looking and what are you looking for? And then equally, are you looking to exclude people or are you looking to include people? When you also look at what you're advertising for, if you're asking for someone who's already been in tech, right, well then we know that, this is a new part of our economy. We know that it's largely grown up in Silicon Valley, where there's not a huge amount of diversity. So that means someone has to if they have to already have those skills in order to get an entree in, right, then that makes it more difficult. Or can they come from the CTO's office in a city like DC, where there may be more diversity, right? Can they come from abroad? Can they come from a public sector, in terms of a university or other place?
Sure.
So I think you have to expand your definition too and where you look.
Okay, that's a great point. And I guess I was getting to potentially looking more upstream to actively invest in helping to fill that pool, whether it's through programs like AWS Educate or, like you said, building and nurturing relationships with a broader pool of universities, et cetera.
It's also about training your own employees, right? So, also, and you see this often with a lot of tech companies, and in fact, I thought Teresa made a good point when she was up there. She came in and she was non-technical when she came in. But she said, but now I'm technical. Now I can have those conversations. Now I can, and what we often forget is that you can, skills, coding skills, programming skills, they're harder to learn, but you can learn them. They're not impossible to learn. And then certainly when it comes to developing systems and some of the other schematics, those are skills that are able to be learned.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. So I believe it's your turn, Teresa.
Okay. So I think that, and I'll speak specifically to the disability population here, there are a number of challenges, and Tony talked about the pool of people. Where do you go to find persons with disabilities who have the skills that you need? And that goes to a bigger problem of just the cultural divide that still exists today. It also goes to a problem of, so you have a person with a disability who has the skills, who is in that top tier. Once they get into that position, are things accessible? Is the technology accessible so they have the same chance at excelling, doing their job, pushing that upper boundary as anyone else? And that's a place where I don't think the playing field is equal. And I still think we are way behind in that. Of if you hire the person with the right skills, but you don't give them what they need to be successful or even compete, then you can't expect growth in that area. And in terms of numbers and metrics, if you look at the metrics for people with disabilities, the statistics that I started with, so we know the population is there. If you look in the federal government at those numbers, and in HHS, the target is to have 2% of the population with targeted disabilities. 2%. That's not very many. And and it's even lower across the federal government. The target is lower. So why can't we meet that number one? Where are we looking for people? And how are we ensuring that once we do hire people, we can retain them. And not just retain them, but promote them. And I think that a lot of that has to do with ensuring that, again, they can play in that same space. And technology is when it works well, a great equalizer. Technology allows me to do my job today. I still run into accessibility challenges, and you have to find workarounds. But it's certainly not, it's not because the population is not in that tier 1 category, that top tier of people that you want to recruit.
Yeah, one of the things when it comes to the disability community is also in the development. It's always, a lot of people approach disability and they say, we've got a product, we should bring in someone who's disabled to see how they use it sort of afterward.
Yeah.
It's much more effective to actually have someone who is disabled on the development team and embedded in the development team. It's something that we've done at Comcast. So I don't know who of you here is a Comcast customer, but if you are, you can get a Comcast voice remote. You can talk to your remote, you can change your channel, you can search for it. All of that is actually the result of actually having a blind person as part of our development team for our video. And they needed to figure out how can they better change channels, know what's going on. It's because they, obviously you can have it read to you once you're on a channel, but how do you actually get to that channel was the difficulty in Surf the Guy. And that then created the voice remote. It's now one of our most popular features, used by almost all of our customers, the most of whom are not blind. So having that embedded in the development team is crucial.
And I think that that's such a great point is just because it may be developed with one population in mind does not mean that they're the only ones who are going to use it. Lots of educational studies talk about kids who learn different ways. If you're a tactile learner, if you're an auditory learner, if you're a visual learner, and giving people the option of utilizing technology in the way that's most efficient and effective for them, no matter who it was developed for, is optimal. It's optimal for everyone, and it does. It increases efficiency across the board.
All right. So at the city level, Archana, what are some of the challenges and/or benefits of addressing inclusion? I know you talked about some of the benefits before of including a broad array of perspectives, whether it's age or gender or ethnicity, but specifically at the city level, what are some of the benefits that come out of that, and can you talk a bit about the approach that you take to inclusion on your team?
Yeah, I think before I address the city level, I think there's a broader debate about diversity and inclusion that gets danced around.
Yeah.
And that's the fact that everyone likes to include it, but no one actually addresses it mainstream. So for example, this is a panel that's at, close to end of the day as a side panel, but it should be a keynote panel center stage where people need to pay attention. That's when you're serious about it. Inclusion happens, thank you. Inclusion also happens when your leadership reflects it. Our inclusion and diversity efforts are all at the entry level and mid-manager level. Are you serious? If I don't see a person that's atypical, not different, in a leadership role, what is motivating me to come in and work hard and move up the ranks?
Yeah.
I am a person that was born in India, I have an accent, I moved to the US, made this my country of choice, live here, and I'm now the CTO for Washington, D.C. If that doesn't tell you that the city of D.C. is more diverse than most places, I don't know what will, right? And what I'm trying to reinforce is, you know what the best part of my job is? It's not the fact that I have the job or that I'm doing it well. It's the fact that other people aspire to it. The conversations I have with my staff are about how did you make it? What can we do to get there? And that is a game changer to motivating people because now they don't think my job is impossible to achieve. And that's what organizations need to do. I actually argue that cities sometimes are way more diverse in terms of how they manage their workforce than the industry is. In the industry, the effort is always at the mid-market level. When you look at the senior leadership, is it reflective? Look at the boards. How many boards in corporate America have women on them? It's dismal.
Yeah.
And we're always dancing around it, and we celebrate when one woman gets on the board. Are you kidding me?
No.
We have 6 CIOs, state CIOs for the entire country. I'm one of those 6.
That's a very valid point.
And so I think sometimes people just need to call a spade a spade. And I think until we openly acknowledge it and we state it and you put it out in the forefront, people are not going to address it. And that's how we approach it in the city, and that's how we approach it in my agency. Work is important, work has to get done. But every time, the one thing I ask my team is, what perspective are we missing? Who else is at this table that doesn't have a perspective? And it doesn't necessarily have to be race or religion or anything else, but it could be somebody that's very quiet that may have a perspective, someone that has that 15 years of experience that I don't have.
Right.
And so you have to constantly challenge yourself and say, what am I not listening to? And I think that's at the working level, if you enforce that and you push that, you will see the difference come out. Because sometimes that diversity and that inclusion is also perspective of why something didn't work, and the more you do it, the more you pull people in, the more motivated they are. There's a lot of work we have to do in the city, but I will say this, I have a huge amount of respect for people who work in the government. Because I challenge any of you that haven't worked in the government, come work for half the pay, a lot of abuse, right, and no respect. Try pitching that to someone. Come work for the organization that we don't think works well, isn't efficient, you should get fired, and oh yeah, we really like you to come at a low pay. And no one will come, right? Will Amazon pitch for a job position that way? Absolutely not. No one's gonna come work for you guys. But the fact that people come in day in and day out, Rupert's sitting out there, he's a long-term government employee, and they come in because there's a sense of service. It's a big deal, right? And so how do you take people who come in with a sense of service, and how do you motivate them? And how do you get them to really pull in that perspective? And that's the challenge. I mean, I have been less a technologist and more focused on bringing the team together in the time I've been there, because they are already really good people with a lot of great experience, right? And so it's about, when you bring the right people together, the kind of work we have gotten done in the last year and a half, I guarantee you will give any private organization a run for their money. I mean, this organization has done amazing work, and that shows that if you actually respect.
Yeah. Wow, very well said. You know. So I've always been told that if you look around and you don't see a role model, chances are you're it. And so I talked about organically sustaining inclusion and diversity by ensuring that once you have a team that is trending toward that equity, that that team then taps their networks. But as an organization that is striving, consistently toward inclusion, whether that's Amazon or NIH or the DC government or Comcast, NBC Universal, I think the candidates or the employees who are searching for that inclusion or represent a certain level of diversity don't always have the luxury of just passively tapping their networks when it's convenient. I think there's a certain level of responsibility to reach back and to ensure that you are helping to take accountability for, the same way you stepped on the shoulders of the people before you, bend over and send the elevator back down for those folks behind you, regardless of the demographic that you represent or the diversity that you represent. So do we have time for one more question? Yes, sir.
Really great points, definitely. But my question is a little different. So there's a bigger divide than the jobs in America right now. The biggest divide is the healthcare cost. I mean, the biggest worry right now is like for people, for the out-of-pocket expenses, and it's just not working right now. And most of our debates have been around insurance policy. It's all about insurance, but nobody talks about the actual cost. How do you see technology taking on that big problem and trying to solve that?
All right. So I don't know if I mentioned this when I kicked off the panel. My role is healthcare lead, primarily for state and local government throughout Amazon, worldwide public sector. We're close to being out of time. I would love to talk to you offline about that. But what I will say is that in general, the healthcare market, both commercial for-profit entities as well as non-profit or state and local government run, they're transitioning from fee-for-service to value-based care. And so technology can help with organizations as they define quality, as they measure it, as they look for trends in utilization so that treatment regimens can be more personalized and cost effectiveness can be attained. So I can talk to you for hours about that, but that's not what this panel is about. But thank you, it's a great question. I'm looking at the timer, it's counting down. I will ask each of you, are there 1 to 2 points that you would like to leave our group with as we go off and become champions for inclusion, something that they should keep in mind and take home with them from this panel? Let's go down the line.
Sure. Just inclusion broadly, I would say the best conversations always start with hello, of people are all fundamentally the same, and you want to approach somebody as you would want to be approached. And I would say don't be afraid to have, to take that risk and have a conversation. Because that's what, learning more and becoming more open is how we get things done and how we change.
Tony?
Yeah, I guess I would say it's all about the data, right? So it's all about knowing your numbers. It's all about being able to share your numbers, also because that is increases your collaboration. So whether we're talking about employment, right, you got to know where you stand before you make improvements. Whether we're talking about how do we create new products, you need to know what they are. You need to have that out there so the people who are outside of the team can get access to them. Whether whatever it is we're talking about when it comes to diversity and inclusion, I think you need to first know your numbers and know what you're talking about, so that you're not just having an empty conversation about it, but that you're really looking to benchmark yourself and make progress.
And Archana? All right. No, thank you guys. Can we give our panel a round of applause? All right. Thank you guys. So what can I say? I think our panelists represented very diverse perspectives from very individual places in their organizations, and so hopefully they have a few minutes. If you like, we can chat with you a little bit. But overall, I'd like to say, as Archana so articulately said, thank you guys for showing up. Thank you guys for showing interest in how to build an environment of diversity and inclusion so that everyone can celebrate and be valued and be a part of the benefits that are being realized by innovations in technology. So have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.